The Stanford prison experiment was an experiment hosted by psychologist Philip Zimbardo. The purpose of the experiment was to understand the development of norms and effects of roles, labels, and social expectations in a simulated prison environment. The experiment started out with 9 random guards and 9 random prisoners. The guards had one big rule starting out. In no way were they allowed to physically harm the prisoners. Each prisoner was taken from their home for a different crime. They were pushed up against cars, put into handcuffs, and thrown into the back of a police car. When the prisoners got to the jail, they were automatically stripped of their identity. They could no longer be called by their real names. From this point forward, they would be known by their numbers only. If you did anything wrong to upset the guard in any way, you could be thrown into the hole. The hole was a small, dark room in which a prisoner was banished to upon doing something wrong. In the hole, it was cold, dark, and very cramped. There wasn't much space to do anything. You were required to stay in the hole until the guard felt that you had learned your lesson. Each prisoner was given their own bed with one blanket. You were to get up when the guard awoke you. No arguments about it. You were required to make your bed as the guard watched over you. If they did not like the way the bed looked, they could make you start all over again. If they approved the way it looked, you were free to stand out in the hallway with the other prisoners until all beds were finished being made. The prisoners started to get fed up with the way the guards were treating them. They knew no physical harm could be done to them, so they plotted to make the guards pay for how they were treating them. They started tearing apart their beds, destructing everything in their cells, screaming profane words, and doing everything they possibly could to rebel against the guards. They couldn't be hit, so what's the worst that could happen, right? The moment the guard struck that prisoner, everything went silent. The guard knew they had messed up in that very moment. The prisoners were very upset about what just occurred. Zimbardo watched this happen and decided that he would let the experiment continue. He wanted to see what would happen next. He wanted to see how the prisoners would handle the situation and how the guards would fight back. As time went on, the guards continued to beat the prisoners more and more, and things started to get out of control. One of the prisoners actually got so upset, they freaked out to the point where they threatened to file a lawsuit. As soon as they threatened this, they let him go. He was supposed to go and get help once he got out to free all of the other prisoners, but he was never heard from again. As the guards started to realize that Zimbardo wasn't doing anything to stop what they were doing, they started to hit and abuse the prisoners even more. It got to the point where the prisoners felt like real prisoners, and the guards felt like real guards. There was no experiment anymore. This was their lives now. They were no longer their own people. They were just what they had been trained to be. Philip Zimbardo finally realized that they had lost sight of who they were before this experiment. They had no concept of time, so they had just given up. The trial in reality only lasted 6 days. When Zimbardo went to tell them the experiment was over, they just looked dazed and confused. The only way that Zimbardo could get it across to them was by saying that the Stanford prison was now closed. When this was said, all the prisoners began smiling. In interviews after the experiment, some of the prisoners admitted that they felt like they lost their sense of identity. They couldn't remember who they were before because all they felt like in that time was a prisoner. The guards also admitted that they got caught up in the moment and acted in ways that they never would have normally acted to any human being, and they felt ashamed for how they had treated them. The subdisciplines of psychology that were displayed in this movie includes cognitive and clinical psychology. This was created in order to investigate the psychological effects of perceived power focused on the struggle between prisoners and guards. It messed with their heads so much they forgot they were college students and actually believed they were someone who they were perceived to be. They lost their character in just 6 days. One psychological theory portrayed in this movie is cognitive psychology. People were taken out of their everyday lives and thrown into an experiment that was nothing like anything they would have experienced in day-to-day life. It was such a change to them that it became reality. Their normal lives were a thing of the past. It messed with their memories and made them focus all of their attention on one thing, surviving. This movie also portrayed behavioral psychology. They learned these behaviors through conditioning. Going into this, they had no idea what they were going to do or say. They just were doing it for the money. No one thought it would turn out how it did, but because it became so normal, they got conditioned to whom they were asked to become. Psychodynamic psychology also played part in the Stanford prison experiment. They wanted to see the psychological forces that underlie human behaviors and how they would handle what they were feeling. The whole experiment was to see how the guards and prisoners would react to being in a prison-like environment and if it would change their identity. This has been the Stanford prison experiment.